This is Fountain
Every
Street
week I find it
Church.
hard to find the best ones, but somehow, like I said, you'll hear what I'm trying to say even when the words
Here,
aren't right.
we strive to free the mind, grow the soul, and change the world. Here, there is freedom to doubt and freedom to believe. Here, you can find a house of prayer for all people.
The swallow up Jonah.
Welcome to Fountain Street Church. Join us on the journey.
They're all celebrities, of course, because no one ordinary ever has an interesting ancestor, of course. And he's talking to Linda Chavez, who was, I think, a secretary in the first Bush White House, if not the second. And turns out that she comes out of Arizona or New Mexico, I think it was. And when they did the DNA sampling, they were able to confirm that she actually did have Jewish ancestry, Jews who had converted under force in the 15th century to avoid being expelled by Ferdinand or Isabella, one of the two of them. And of course, that meant they were converted formally, but they kept their Jewish faith at home. And sometimes the rituals would persist long after the reasons for them would be there. She said that she never understood why the statue of the Virgin was always facing the wall on Fridays. And now even her grandmother didn't know why. It went back 500 years. This was good news to her to find a piece into her past. Another woman he interviewed, Margaret Cho, learned that her father, Korean, came here in part because when the Japanese arrived in Korea to be their occupier, he was a station master and became the station master for them as well. And after the war, he was terribly ashamed, and the community largely told him to get out of town. So you see, remembering can be dangerous. You might find out things about your family that they didn't want you to find out. Families, I discovered, sometimes had more than one. Occasionally, the philandering bigamist will have a whole other family you're relating to, and that may not be the reason, that may be the reason he decided to get out of town in the first place. But we can generalize, too. There are places that are imprisoned in their past. We all know about them. What is Israel and Palestine but two ancestral communities that are struggling to be at home in a place that both want to live? What is Serbia and Kosovo but a disastrous and terribly obliterating civil war about who belongs where? India and Pakistan, millions perished because of those ancient times. And what is Ireland? Oh, a thicket of memory. Whole nations where the current generation is literally held hostage to something sometimes centuries old. So there's a good reason to forget, not only for our own well-being, but for whole nations. And of course, that's something we in America think we don't have. We don't have those memories of the old times. No, we don't. We have memories of our own times, and we're not very good at being free of them. William Faulkner famously observed that the past is not dead. It's not even past. Memorial Day is a perfect example. It evolved slowly from 3 different observances into a way to smooth over the divisions of the Civil War. By decorating all the graves of all the soldiers, we could honor them all. And by focusing our memory on the nobility of the soldiers, we could also overlook the ignoble reasons they had to fight one another at all. And those divisions, they're far from gone. Do we not still struggle over the questions of race, religion, class, and culture that propelled us into a civil war? They're not gone. We're simply remembering them carefully by forgetting the parts that hurt. One could say that our current polarized struggle between liberals and conservatives is just another version of Union versus Confederate. And until we remember all of them, we will settle none of them. Our rituals of remembering, the solemn parades, the firing rifles, the placing of wreaths, these don't help us to remember. They help us to forget. Formal ceremonies, nice cemeteries with orderly stones help us forget the carnage of battlefields. The red in the flag looks stirring, and it helps us forget the reality of blood. Of course, we know this. We actually know the hard stuff because that's more recent, those world wars. We know why our voices catch and our throats clench. Old men in moth-eaten uniforms are unspeakably moving. We all have a story. I think of Richard, who served and then returned to the tiny town where I was ordained 30 years ago. Back in 2005, before we came here, we were there that Memorial Day because we hadn't seen them for a long time, all of our friends, and it turned out to be a rainy day. And so the parade to all the little cemeteries was canceled, and they held it all in a very humid, crowded town hall. We arrived late, of course, and went up to the balcony, and I looked down, and there I saw all the old men wearing their uniforms from the war. And there was Richard in his Eisenhower-style jacket wearing his overseas cap, and I could barely keep the tears from flowing because there he was, putting on his youth again, wearing it not only with pride but with sorrow for all the friends that he lost and all the friends that he kept. It is something to look at old men in uniforms and remember that the survivors of war are as much casualties as are the dead. Of course, in a much smaller way, we feel that loss when we read our own friends' names on Memorial Sunday. We each know at least something about one of those people, maybe more than one. Some of us remember when they were young, which means when we were young, and some of us knew them only in age and we wondered about them. Some of you shared intimately with them as friends, and some of you barely knew them as church members or friends of members. What we notice is not only what we know, but what we don't know. We remember and we know what we don't remember. And that's where the poignance comes from, because these parts of them will be forever lost. Not just the parts we knew, but the parts we never knew will be lost too. Some weeks ago, I think at the beginning of May, I quoted a passage from Ecclesiasticus. That's a book in the Apocryphal Bible with a beautiful passage. And some there be which have no memorial, who are perished as though they had never been, and are become as though they were never born. That's not just poetry. That's a fact. On the radio in the car one day on my way to work, turning the corner, I'm listening, and a man, smart fellow, casually observes that 100 years after we die, there will be no one left to remember us. The third generation is gone by then. We will vanish. Unless, of course, you're a president, in which case they'll name a street after you, or maybe a library, or you're rich and powerful, in which case they'll put your name on anything you pay for. But we also have our forgotten important ones. There's a plaque right over here. Have you read it? It's supposed to keep your memory alive. You haven't read it, have you? Each of those windows at the bottom, there's a name. Do you know them? Even we who purchase our immortality cannot do it for more than a century. We don't know how to remember, how to keep the names with us, and also live in the present. We're always torn between being stuck in the past and being drawn into the future. It's an awful bargain, it seems, an awful bargain, the price of a free future or a forgotten past. You'll notice, though, I said the word seems. I do have an answer. Maybe you won't like it, but it is an answer. Each week in Jewish life, in synagogues, the last prayer is said by mourners. It's called Mourner's Kaddish. It's actually the same prayer that's said 5 or 6 times all during the day. It starts the service. It marks the divisions in it. And you have to say it in order to get to the end of the service. And the last one, as I've mentioned earlier this month, is said by those who grieve, whether newly grieved or on the anniversary of death, something that is called Yartzeit, meaning year time. In Sholem Aleichem's story, I'm lucky, I'm an orphan. You heard the start. The young boy is made an orphan. And he continues saying, the first day after Shavuot, that would be today, my brother and I began to say Kaddish. In the synagogue, I stand on a bench and rattle it off without a pause. All the boys stand around me and envy me. The women weep.